My son-in-law thought I was a sleeping old man he could rob. He had no idea I'd already emptied that safe weeks before and replaced everything in it with something that would break him completely. I lay in my bed in the dark that night, breathing slow and even, my eyes closed to the thinnest slits, and I watched him ease open my bedroom door and creep toward my dresser. He believed I was drugged and helpless after my surgery, dead to the world. He was wrong about almost everything that night, but he was most wrong about what he would find once he got that safe open. This story only makes sense if I start from the beginning, because you need to understand who I am, who my son-in-law is, and how a man ends up lying in his own bed pretending to sleep while someone he should be able to trust robs him blind. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I'm 72 now, and this all happened last year, in the months after my heart surgery. I built a modest manufacturing business over 40 years, nothing flashy, but solid and real. I earned every bit of what I have the hard way, and I was never a fool about money or people. My son-in-law seemed to believe otherwise, and that mistake became the whole story. Last year, my health failed. Heart surgery, followed by a long, hard recovery. For months, I was genuinely weak, moving slowly, sleeping constantly, foggy from medication. My son-in-law looked at that frail old man shuffling around in his robe and decided that because my body had grown weak, my mind must have gone weak with it. He mistook a sick body for a sleeping mind. That mistake is the whole reason this story exists, because while my body slowed down that year, my mind had nothing else to do but watch, and I watched everything. Let me tell you about my daughter first, because she's the reason any of this matters. Her name is Claire. She's about 41, my only child, and I love her more than my own life. Her mother, my wife Eleanor, passed away several years back, and losing her hollowed me out in a way I've never fully recovered from. After Eleanor was gone, Claire became the only family I had left in this world. Eleanor matters to this story too. We were married 43 years, and she was always the warm one. I was the guarded one, the one who noticed people's angles. She was the one who saw their hearts. When Claire first brought her husband home, it was Eleanor who told me to give him a chance, that not everyone grew up with what we had, that some people learned to grab because nobody ever handed them anything. It was Eleanor's voice I kept hearing all through those months of watching my son-in-law scheme, telling me that a desperate man isn't always an evil one. I think that voice is the reason I chose to write a letter instead of simply calling the police. Eleanor would have wanted the door left open for him, even at the very end, even in the safe. Her wedding ring was in there partly because it was precious to me, and partly because some part of me wanted her presence in that room when my son-in-law finally opened it. Claire's future, Claire's security, Claire's happiness, that was the single most important thing to me in the world, more important than any amount of money. And that's exactly why what her husband was doing filled me with such a cold, quiet resolve. Now let me tell you about my son-in-law. His name is Dean Corwin. Claire married him about 11 years ago, and I had reservations from the start, though I kept most of them to myself because Claire loved him. Dean was charming, smooth, easy to like at first, and a little harder to like the longer you knew him. Over the years, I watched him reveal himself slowly. Dean was a man always chasing money and never quite catching it. Big ideas, poor judgment, a string of ventures that never panned out, and a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. Underneath the charm sat a deep sense of entitlement, a belief that the world, and especially his wealthy father-in-law, owed him the success he could never earn on his own. For years, Dean angled at my money in small ways, hints about investments, suggestions about loans, a general air of waiting and calculating, as if my savings were partly his by right of marriage. I never gave him a cent for any of his schemes. I'd worked too hard, and I saw exactly what he was. I think my refusal built up a real resentment in him, a belief that I was sitting on a fortune that should rightfully flow his way. Then two things happened at once, and together they created the perfect storm. First, Dean landed in serious financial trouble. I didn't know the specifics then, but I saw the signs, the tension, the whispered phone calls, the desperation hiding just under his charm. He dug himself into a hole with the kind of people you don't want to owe money to, and he needed cash fast. Second, I had my surgery, and in his eyes I became weak, isolated, foggy, A widower with a valuable safe in his bedroom and nobody around to protect him. To a desperate man who already believed my money belonged to him, I must have looked like the answer to every problem he had. Dean and Claire had been staying with me during my recovery, officially to help care for me, which Claire genuinely did, God bless her. But it also put Dean inside my house, close to my safe, watching me shuffle around in my weakness, and I have no doubt that proximity fed the temptation. Here's what he never understood, though. I'd seen it coming, all of it, because a sharp mind trapped in a weak body has nothing left to do but observe. I saw the desperation. I noticed where his eyes landed whenever he passed my safe. I caught fragments of those frightened phone calls. I watched him test me with foggy old man questions, probing to see exactly how confused I really was. And I understood, with total clarity, that my son-in-law was working himself up to rob me. It was only a matter of time. There was one afternoon, about 3 weeks before the night at the drawer, that erased any last doubt I had. I was dozing in my armchair, or appearing to, and through my lashes I watched Dean walk into the room, stand over me, and quietly say my name, testing whether I'd stir. When I didn't, he walked to my desk and gently tried the drawer where I kept my safe key, just to learn the terrain. He didn't take anything that day. He was scouting. Then he looked back at me, asleep in my chair, and something crossed his face that chilled me straight through. Not guilt. Calculation. He was measuring me for a robbery the way a man measures a window he plans to climb through. I closed my eyes fully and kept my breathing even. And inside, my heart was breaking. That was the afternoon I called my lawyer, a sharp and trustworthy man named Douglas Reyes. I didn't wait another day. I want to be careful and honest here, because this is the moral center of the whole story. I didn't set a cruel trap. I didn't scheme to destroy Dean. What I did was protect my daughter and everything I'd built through entirely lawful, deliberate means. I quietly moved the bulk of my real assets, the money, the investments, the valuable holdings, into protected trusts that Dean could never touch, structures built entirely for Claire's benefit. I revised my will so that everything I had would protect and provide for my daughter in ways Dean could never redirect, no matter what he tried in the dead of night. And critically, I emptied the safe of everything he expected to find. The cash, the valuables, all of it. I quietly moved every bit of it elsewhere, because I knew he was coming for that safe, and I wasn't about to leave a pile of money sitting there for him to hand off to dangerous men. But I didn't leave the safe empty. What I put inside instead is the entire point of this story. Because whatever else I am, I'm also a father, and a man who had genuinely tried for 11 years to love this man as a son. I wanted him to understand something, so into that safe, in place of the cash he was hunting for, I placed some very particular things. Now let me tell you about the night itself, because I want you to feel it the way I felt it. It was well past midnight. Claire was asleep down the hall, and where she was mattered enormously, because everything I'd done was ultimately about the woman sleeping behind that door. She had no idea what her husband was becoming, no idea her father lay awake at night listening for a thief. I'd decided weeks earlier that whatever happened, Claire would be protected, both her money and, if I could manage it, her heart. That's why the letter mattered as much as the legal documents. The paperwork protected her money. The letter was my attempt to protect the chance that she might not lose her entire world in one single night. Around 1 a.m, I heard my bedroom door ease open. I'd lain awake for hours before that, and here's the strangest part. I spent most of those hours praying I was wrong, bargaining with myself. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe I'd misjudged him. Right up until I heard that door, some stubborn part of me was still hoping. That's the thing nobody tells you about being betrayed by family. You see it coming. You prepare for it. And still, some loving, foolish part of you keeps the light on. When that door finally eased open, that last hopeful part of me quietly died, even as the prepared part of me lay perfectly still and watched. He slid open the drawer slowly, wincing at every small sound, until his hand found the key exactly where he'd known it would be. He carried it to the safe in the corner of my room, knelt down in the dark, and I lay there and watched my daughter's husband unlock it, believing he was robbing a helpless, sleeping old man. He got it open. I watched him reach in, expecting his hands to fill with cash. Instead, his hands found what I'd left for him, and he went completely still. Then, one by one, he began pulling things out, and I watched understanding wash over him. I watched my son-in-law go numb. His hands, expecting bundles of cash, came out instead holding paper. Documents. An envelope with his own name written across the front. He turned it over slowly in the dark, and I watched him go rigid when he realized the old man he thought he was robbing had left him a letter. The first thing in the safe was a folder of documents, and when he opened it, he understood he was finished. Copies of the trusts, the revised will, the asset protections. Proof that everything I owned had already been moved beyond his reach weeks earlier, locked away for Claire's protection in structures he could never touch. There was no fortune to steal. The helpless, foggy old man he thought he was robbing had, while shuffling around in his robe, quietly outmaneuvered him completely. But it was the second item that actually broke him, because it wasn't legal paperwork at all. It was a letter, written by my own hand, sealed in an envelope with his name on it, left sitting right on top so it would be the first thing his fingers touched. I'm going to tell you roughly what that letter said, because it's the heart of everything. It said that if he was reading these words, he'd done exactly what I hoped he never would, that I'd known for months what he was planning, that I'd watched him, and that I was sorry for his desperation more than he could imagine. It told him there was nothing left here to take, that I'd protected everything for Claire, not to punish him, but to protect her. And in some ways, to protect him from himself. Then it told him the real reason I was writing. That for 11 years I had tried to love him as my own son, that I never had a son of my own, and when Claire married him, I'd hoped I'd finally been given one. It told him that if he had ever come to me honestly, the way a son comes to a father, and simply told me he was in trouble, I would have helped him, freely, far more than whatever he'd come to steal that night. The real tragedy wasn't that he'd tried to rob me, it was that he never had to. All he ever needed to do was ask. Underneath that letter sat the keepsakes, and I'm told this is the part that truly finished him. A photograph of Claire as a little girl on my shoulders, a photo from Claire and Dean's wedding day, both of us smiling, my hand resting on his shoulder, Eleanor's wedding ring, a few of her old letters to me, the actual treasures of my life, sitting where a desperate man had expected to find gold. I watched my son-in-law sink down onto the floor, the letter still in his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. I lay there, no longer pretending, my eyes fully open now, and I didn't say a single word. I let him have that moment with what he'd found. I didn't leap up and call the police that night, and I want to explain why, because it wasn't weakness. Eventually Dean realized I was awake, that I'd watched all of it. I will carry the look on his face to my own grave. He tried to speak and couldn't, and finally just kept repeating that he was sorry, over and over. I told him, steady as I could manage, that I knew he was sorry, and that now he had a choice to make, the most important one of his life. What he'd done was unforgivable, and I still wasn't going to have him hauled away that night, for one reason only. My daughter, asleep down the hall, who didn't deserve to wake up and find her husband a thief and her father his accuser. I gave him a choice. He would tell Claire the truth himself, all of it. He would get real help for whatever trouble he was in. He would become the man that letter said he could still be, or he would lose my daughter, because I would not stand by and watch her life dragged down by a man drowning in debt and lies. Her security was already guaranteed either way, but whether Dean remained part of her life going forward was entirely up to him. Here's how it actually turned out, and it surprised even me. Dean told Claire everything. It was a terrible few days. My daughter was devastated, rightly so, learning what her husband had tried to do to her own father. There was a real chance the marriage wouldn't survive it, and I told Claire honestly that I would support her fully, whatever she decided, and that she owed Dean nothing. But there's something about hitting absolute bottom, about being seen completely in your worst moment and met with love instead of destruction. For some people it breaks them. For others, it remakes them. Dean, to my genuine surprise, was remade by it. That letter, that night, the grace of not being destroyed when he fully deserved to be, cracked open the entitlement he'd carried his whole life. A man who'd always believed the world owed him something was finally, at 43, confronted with the truth of himself, and with a father-in-law who loved him anyway. It changed him. He got help with the debt, on my terms, with real accountability every step of the way. He went to counseling. He faced whatever had been broken in him for years, and slowly, over the following year, he became a different man. Humbler, honest. The man that letter had always believed he could be. Claire, for her part, chose to stay, not blindly, but with clear eyes in hard conditions and a long road of rebuilding trust ahead. And over this past year, I've watched my son-in-law finally become the son I'd hoped for 11 years ago. Not because I forced him to, but because that safe showed him exactly who he'd become and exactly who he could still choose to be. For once in his life, he chose right. A few weeks after that night, Dean came to see me, already different. He asked why I would have helped him, after everything, if he'd only come to me honestly instead. I told him the truth. Because he married my daughter, and that made him mine, whether he'd earned it or not. That's what family is, I told him. It isn't something you earn, it's something you're given, and then you spend your whole life trying to become worthy of it. He wept, and I put my hand on his shoulder, the same shoulder my hand had rested on in that wedding photo from the safe. For the first time in 11 years, it finally felt true. It felt like father and son. My son-in-law broke into my safe in the dead of night, expecting to find treasure, something cold and hard he could steal to save himself. Instead, he found the only treasure that ever actually mattered, proof that someone had loved him all along, had been ready to give him everything freely. If only he'd been the kind of man who could ask instead of steal. He went looking for gold and found love instead, and it devastated him because love was the one thing his entire grasping worldview had never accounted for. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. The people who love you, the family who would help you if you only found the courage to be honest, are worth more than anything you could ever take by force or deceit. Don't be the man breaking into the safe. Be the son who comes to his father and says he's in trouble and needs help. In most cases, the thing you're trying to steal was already yours for the asking, and the love was there the whole time. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales for more real stories about family, betrayal, and the quiet grace that finds its way through in the end. Your support means everything to this channel.